How old are you?
17.
In screenwriter John Milius' 1969 draft of the script, we are introduced to the crew who would escort Captain Willard up the Nung River not on the boat, but on the dock. Milius writes, Willard walks down the dock to the waiting PBR, Patrol Boat River, a small light craft, very fast, heavily armed. Beside it stands a crew of 4. The crew was made up of Chief Warrant Officer R. Chief Phillips, J. Chef Hicks, Lance B. Johnson, and Tyrone Clean Miller. Coppola filmed something similar to what we see in Milius' 1969 draft that was ultimately cut from the movie and replaced with voiceover while already on the boat.
Captain Willard, Quartermaster Chief Phillips, sir. Glad to have you aboard, sir.
Thank you.
The captain, meet our crew.
I imagine that some changes were made to this section after Harvey Keitel was removed from the cast. In this episode, we'll take a look at the members of the PBR crew and the actors who played them, Coppola's philosophy behind directing actors, and the insane detail that went into creating the Kurtz dossier. All that and more on this episode of Making Apocalypse Now.
Terminate. It's extreme prejudice. Are you an assassin or a soldier?
The part of Mr. Clean would be played by young Laurence Fishburne. How young? Well, he lied about his age, saying that he was 18 when in fact, he was only 14 years old at the time he was hired. Apocalypse Now producer Fred Roos, who also served as the casting director, claims that the production didn't find out until they were already on location in the Philippines. Fishburne attributes his getting the part to a secretary who happened to walk into the room while he was meeting with Roos and Coppola.
A young woman who was working in the office as a secretary got up and walked through. And as she was walking, Francis finally spoke up and he just looked at her and he said, "Excuse me, you think this kid could be 18? And whoever this young woman was, she turned around and looked at me and went, "Yeah, I guess so." And I think that's how I got over on that tip.
Fishburne would later become a household name with such varied roles as Furious Styles in Boys in the Hood, Cowboy Curtis in Pee-wee's Playhouse, and of course, Morpheus in The Matrix. Fishburne got involved with Apocalypse Now because he had appeared in the TV movie If You Give a Dance, You Gotta Pay the Band, that was written by a friend of producer Fred Roos. Roos had kept Fishburne in mind for future projects, and when the role of a young soldier from the Bronx came up for Apocalypse Now, he thought of Fishburne. I wasn't able to find a clip from that movie, but here's Fishburne in a movie he acted in shortly after titled Cornbread, Earl, and Me.
That's my cousin. Who? Can't you see? Cornbread, that's who. He is not, is so.
He's cornbread.
Coppola wanted a very young-looking soldier on the boat to depict the real 16 and 17-year-olds who found themselves involved in a war that they were too young to really understand. Fishburne would celebrate his 15th and 16th birthdays during filming.
And that's, I think, what my role is about. I mean, it's about the kids that were over there, you know, who didn't know anything about anything. You know, they were just kind of snatched up and used as cannon fodder for this war.
Fishburne would be chosen over some other young up-and-comers, like actor-director Kevin Hooks.
I hear the guys in Brooklyn are really bad.
Yeah, they bad enough.
How bad are you?
I don't expect you want to know.
The part of Chef would be played by Frederick Forrest. Forrest had appeared in Coppola's The Conversation, and they liked him enough to just give him the part without any screen testing. He was hired on with, quote, a 7-year contract at $1,000 a week for the first year, and escalating thereafter. Milius said, Chef was one of my ideas. I thought this absurd a kind of trait to be a saucier and he ends up in the Navy, and can't stand it because all the food is ruined.
See, I come from New Orleans. I was raised to be a saucier. Great saucier.
Forrest ended up being the last of the PBR actors to feel comfortable in his character. Coppola said that it can take a week or even 3 weeks for an actor to feel comfortable playing their role. When an actor has trouble finding their character, Coppola will invite them to dinner. He had dinner with Forrest, who told him that he felt like he wasn't making the movie, that he was visualizing himself in Beverly Hills. Coppola told him to incorporate that into the character.
We felt like after a while we really weren't there. It was like you were in a dream or something, you know? It was very, we'd say to Francis, I'm not here, Francis. I'm in Montana with Jack Nicholson.
Eva can't picture me in Vietnam. She pictures me at home having a beer watching TV.
The surfer, Lance, would be played by 21-year-old Sam Bottoms. Bottoms signed on to a 7-year contract at $500 a week for the first year. Lance is described by Milius in the 1969 draft as, quote, a perfect image of the blonde California surfer, which he is. Bottoms was actually from Santa Barbara, California, and was still a teenager when he was first approached. Milius had a strong interest in the California surfing culture, and between the production and release of Apocalypse Now, Milius would write and direct a movie dedicated entirely to surfing titled Big Wednesday. There was a scene in the script that explained that Lance had volunteered to go to Vietnam because he was rejected by a high school classmate and cheerleader he was infatuated with, but it was ultimately cut from the movie. However, it does make an appearance in some behind-the-scenes footage taken during the casting process.
Oh, I didn't know what I was doing, man. She was, man, she was my dream.
Bottoms said, Lance was just a surfer, his family were all surfers, and he overcame his innocence throughout the whole thing. Chief would be played by Albert Hall. Milius describes Chief as a tough but sloppy-looking man, but he doesn't seem sloppy-looking in the final film. Producer Fred Roos had seen Hall in a play and liked him. Hall had appeared in plays and on TV, but hadn't had many movie roles before Apocalypse Now. They thought he was perfect for the role of Chief, the no-nonsense captain of the PBR. Hall signed the same 7-year contract for $500 a week for the first year.
Francis was the first director that I'd ever met who kept asking for more. I'd never had that challenge before, and I liked it.
And when you get into this anger, Albert, don't decide where you're going to get to. Wherever you get to, as long as it's out of you, is okay.
Following the crew's introduction on the dock in Milius' 1969 draft are some other bits that didn't make it into the final film. Lance offers Chief some fish that he fermented and fried in motor oil, causing Willard to vomit over the side of the boat. Coppola wrote in the margins of Milius' script, "Okay, he gets sick, but I need more. Something between Willard and the river, the jungle, some observation, a feeling of something deeper, not just amusing." Then Chief tells the crew a story about going to a massage parlor. Like Lance's cheerleader story, this was ultimately cut from the movie, but we can see it performed in the casting featurette on the Blu-ray for the final cut.
I said, "You just been giving me a hand massage. Now what is this very special massage?" She didn't want to answer that. Just said I was a very number 10 GI.
Coppola continues his notes, writing, "I want to start getting into Willard's head here. By now, we have got to be into him, interested in him, and linked with him." Now, as you might have noticed, all of the main actors were signed to these unorthodox 7-year contracts. Pretty much everything about Apocalypse Now was unique, so why should the actor contracts be an exception? According to Stephen Travers, Coppola was upset that he was abandoned by actors like Al Pacino and others from the Godfather movies, actors who owed their position in the film industry to Coppola's success and vision. Variety magazine wrote that Coppola's, quote, incentive-laden back-end deals were his way of getting some payback from an industry he arrogantly felt never gave him his due. Frederick Forrest expected that his 7-year contract would be for 2 or 3 films, instead of spending an undetermined amount of time on location in the Philippines. But now, the production was in full swing, and everyone was ready and willing to give themselves over to the vision of their leader. Sometimes the actors would get pages that just said, "Scenes unknown," and they would show up with no idea what they were going to do that day. Producer Fred Roos said, "You want each day to say, what will we do today? You want a real plan for each day, but Francis is a writer, and as the co-writer of the script, he could create things at the moment, and if an idea came up, he'd sit there all night and write it." And sometimes Coppola would skip the writing part and try an improvisation. Coppola had an interesting technique when exploring and doing improvisations. Editor Walter Murch said, "Francis had the notion that if you wanted an actor to investigate a certain part of a character in an improvisational way, you turn film on it, even if you think the film will never be used, because it makes the actor wake up. After all, it could be used. Resources are being expended. What you wind up with has a different feel than if it were just an actor and a director alone in a room saying, 'Let's investigate,' although some of that is done too." Coppola would usually write up a bunch of little note cards of different ideas he had for the scene they were about to shoot.
And then I propose that we do 4 close-ups. Sam, Chief, Martin, everyone, looking at the birds so I can use the sound of the birds with maybe 3 birds going through and I can create the illusion of there being birds.
Coppola's excitement was infectious. John Milius, being John Milius, had this to say about Coppola's leadership. You know, Francis can convince me of anything. Francis is still my Führer, and I use that term intentionally, because in all my readings about Hitler, I'm convinced that Hitler has never been portrayed correctly, because he had to be like Francis. He could get anybody to do anything. So Francis can go to Cannes and hog all the credit, and when I call him on it, he says, well, I got up in front of the press and I couldn't help myself. And I forgive him for it, because Francis has a greatness in him.
Montagnard army of his that worship the man like a god and follow every order, however ridiculous.
Coppola didn't want his actors to really act, but instead build their character out of their own personality, saying, I don't make the person play the part, I make the part play the person. People think that you only do that with non-actors. It works great with actors.
Mr. Coppola, I presume?
It's Coppola.
Don't give me line readings!
Coppola and Roos employed the same approach they took when casting The Godfather. They saw hundreds of actors in both New York City and Los Angeles, going in-depth with weeks and weeks of interviews and then screen tests. They rented a small soundstage and had all of the actors in the same room, instead of auditioning one at a time while the others waited outside. Roos said, it was free-flowing, not formal. Everyone was around and switching parts.
I'd like Tommy, you read Willard. Freddie's gonna read Chef. And Sam, you read Lance. And Albert, you read Chief.
The PBR crew had been cast already, and Coppola brought in other actors to audition with them, improvise scenes together, and bounce ideas off each other. The point was for everyone to get to know each other, and to have an opportunity to experiment and be creative. This way, not only do the PBR actors build a rapport, but they create memories that can be used later.
You guys are fresh. You want to get your boat from here to there. These guys are beginning to get weird.
How fat can they get? Let me ask you a question. How much butter you got on those tracks?
Coppola would have the actors improvise scenes that weren't in the script, and experiment in a setting where you don't have to be afraid of looking foolish. And these sessions were great for building backstory that could be used during the production.
You know, if you've got a couple who's supposed to have been married 30 years, imagine a real 30-year-old couple, the memories that they've built up. You know, first time they argued, first time they broke up, first time someone was cheating if they were, first time this, first time that.
So it might not even be in the script. It's stuff, let's do it so that you have a memory of it.
It's
and the
just,
character has
just
a memory
do
of it.
it so that and when you are playing a scene and all of a sudden something happens and there's just a flicker in the eye and you know one person is remembering something that...
The improvisation.
So when Sam Bottoms told Lance's story about the cheerleader, or Albert Hall told Chief's story about the massage parlor, they could incorporate those memories into their performance, and the other actors could incorporate it into their performances in how their character views Lance or Chief.
That's when the rockets hit the place. They hit it 3 times. I think she got zapped.
My orders say I'm not supposed to know where I'm taking this boat, so I don't. But one look at you and I know it's gonna be hot, wherever it is.
But above all, each actor knew that they were writing their performance, and that they and their character were intertwined.
Francis come to us and said, you guys got the characters now. Don't act.
We weren't acting, we were just living. We had those characters down.
He'd tell me constantly, Willard is you, whoever you are at this time, in this place.
And it wasn't just the actors who were living their part, Coppola was as well. In a diary entry by Eleanor Coppola from April 28, 1976, shortly after Martin Sheen replaced Harvey Keitel, Eleanor wrote, Francis had 2 readings with the cast this week. The actors were very enthusiastic, but Francis is really in a state of anxiety and fear, that the script has some good supporting characters and some good scenes, but Willard and Kurtz are not resolved, and here he is in the middle of this giant production. I remember the anxiety he felt and the struggle he had with the script of Godfather 2, and it seems, in retrospect, at that time, he was himself dealing with the same themes in his own life: money, power, and family. Now he is struggling with the themes of Willard's journey into self and Kurtz's truths, that are, in a way, themes that he has not resolved within himself. So he is really going through the most intense struggle to write his way to the end of the script and understand himself on the way.
I took the mission. What the hell else was I gonna do? But I really didn't know what I'd do when I found him.
Meanwhile, Willard opens the Kurtz dossier and starts to learn about the man he is on a mission to kill. The research process for Apocalypse Now took from early 1975 until about June of 1977, and was completed entirely by Deborah Fine in Los Angeles. Fine was tasked with researching, quote, Montagnards, the NVA, North Vietnamese Army, Cambodian ruins, rubber plantations, combat bunkers, ARVN operations, U.S. Forces wardrobe, China Beach, PBRs, Patrol Boat River, weaponry, and USO shows. On February 8, 1976, Coppola sent Fine a telex about the dossier reading. Essentially, the various envelopes and files in Willard's pouch contained the main narrative thread of the story. When he was briefed by the general, he only really focused on the fact that there was some big assignment, and he was being sent on it. He does not digest, nor the audience, any of the details on Green Berets, Colonel Kurtz, called Laley in the shot scene must be dubbed to Kurtz, the Rolt-like murder charge, the phasing out of the Green Berets, the so-called war within the war between the regular army and the special forces, etc. All we show at the beginning of the picture is that he kills on special assignments, that there's a guy named Kurtz who's out there insane, and that he must be killed. Each scene begins with the withdrawal of a sealed classified document, Willard breaking the seal, and an examination of the information, pictures, clippings, letters, etc. Coppola separated the dossier story into 7 seals. Each time Willard opens a new piece and reveals more and more about Kurtz. These were 1. Up to New Mong Ba that we see first. 2 takes place after How Fat. 3 involves Kurtz's personal life. 4 goes into a, quote, more frightening area of insanity. 5 is given to him at Do Lung and contains info about Captain Colby. 6 is Colby's military file with a letter that says, sell the kids. And 7 contains the codes for the airstrike. The physical dossier prop was incredibly detailed. Fine researched everything down to Kurtz's yearbook photo, and how the letterhead and stamps would appear on classified military documents. Fine even made tax returns for Kurtz, as well as a driver's license for his wife, and tons of letters to his family. Milius wrote letters that Dennis Jacob revised. Coppola filmed Willard reading one of the letters from Kurtz to his wife, which was cut from the film.
I hope no one sees this message. Written in the calm, lonely, far-out, languid afternoon, with my total love, Shirley.
Readings and long monologues were later replaced with a narration written by Michael Hare. Hare was a writer and war correspondent most known for writing Dispatches, a memoir about his time as a correspondent during the Vietnam War. Hare would go on to co-write Stanley Kubrick's Vietnam War film, Full Metal Jacket. We'll talk a bit more about Hare in some later episodes. The scene ends similarly to how it does in Milius' 1969 draft. He writes, suddenly, there is a slow buffeting, as if the air around them is being sucked out and replaced quickly. The boat shakes slightly. Willard gets up. There's a distant rolling noise, like interrupted thunder. Coppola wrote in the margins, at first it seems something natural and unfathomable, and it frightens the crew.
Hey, what's that?
Arc light.
What's up?
B-52 strike.
What's that?
Arc light.
Hate that.
The arc light was an operation in which B-52 bombers that had previously carried nuclear weapons would instead drop conventional munitions on enemy areas in Vietnam. The bombs would be very loud, and Coppola intended to use Sensurround, a kind of surround sound made for movies like 1974's Earthquake. They ended up mixing it in their own version of Sensurround, and intentionally made the theater seats rumble with the sound of the bombs going off in the distance.
Terrible's gonna happen. Smoke! Secondary burning. Huey's over there. Lots of Hueys.
Tune in next time when we'll meet Colonel Kilgore, or is it Colonel Carnage, played by the legendary Robert Duvall. This episode's $1 companion PDF features some more info on Laurence Fishburne's time in the Philippines, including his friendship with Emilio Estevez and meeting Marlon Brando. It's just $1 and it really helps the series. Or you can support me on Patreon at the $5 level for access to all of the companion PDFs I've made. Thanks for watching.